So you set your grandma's house on fire because you charged your LiPo battery and it exploded. And now you're a convicted arsonist. Despite all your pleas to the police, I'm just a baby. You're in trouble. Or at very least, you broke your favorite airsoft gun.
Gino.
What the hell? Oh shit.
Back away from it.
Now, I didn't know exactly how to word this video necessarily. It might not be a big deal to an experienced airsoft player, but this is mostly for the people who are new to the hobby. This whole idea stemmed while I was watching the most recent WAG Entertainment video where he was showcasing weapons from Black Ops 6, one of them being the SR-25. When he went to use the SR-25 airsoft rifle. One thing he stated in the video was he was very upset with the trigger response of the gun.
You could definitely tell the internals are cycling pretty slow.
Then he also stated that he was using a 7.4 volt LiPo battery.
We are using a 7.4 volt LiPo, so let's go ahead and see how it shoots.
Which to the regular player isn't really that big of a deal. In my personal opinion, actually it does make a huge difference. Now there's a lot of talk that I see around because this whole instance of this video led me down an entire rabbit hole on airsoft batteries. Despite what I was finding with research, my own personal experience, I have a lot of guns that I've tested different battery types with.
A 7.4 volt LiPo battery is roughly equivalent to a 9.6 volt nickel battery in terms of actual power coming out.
Contrary to popular belief, they say that the 7.4 volt LiPo is the same energy output as the 9.6 volt nickel battery. Theoretically, the trigger response should be the same. You know, they're just as strong. With my experience in testing all of my guns with the 7.4 and then going to the 9.6, the 9.6 always has better trigger response and faster rate of fire. I don't know if it's the same because a lot of kids run 7.4 volt and their guns are super speedy. But it also comes down to the build quality of the gun. You can put a 7.4 volt battery in any gun and it doesn't make a difference. Try telling that to my combat machine, which caught fire the minute I put a LiPo battery in it because it's not a LiPo gun. Lots of people, when they go into depth about talking about batteries for airsoft guns, will say if you are going to use a LiPo gun or a LiPo battery in a non-LiPo gun, your best bet is to go with the 7.4 volt LiPo. It's the safest way and it won't damage your gun. What I'm trying to establish here, if you're an experienced airsofter and you've been in the hobby for years and you run a 7.4 LiPo setup in your non-LiPo ready gun and it works, no big deal, because if something goes wrong, you know how to handle it. Or if you're an adult and you're new into the hobby and your gun catches on fire, you probably will have a better handle on what to do in that situation than if little Timmy picked up an airsoft gun when his parents weren't home and his gun caught fire. So if you're new into the hobby and you aren't super mechanically inclined and don't want to tear apart your guns and troubleshoot and all this stuff, you go to buy your gun and it says that the recommended is a 9.6 volt nickel battery. Just stick to that. It'll be alright. The trigger response is always great. Even on cheap guns, it's perfectly fine. Another good example for LiPo is with one of these guns I have. This is a non-LiPo gun, and when I first started using it, I didn't know that much about airsoft batteries. So I just thought the bigger the battery, the more boom boom for the fast skibbity knockouts you can get kids calling their hits. Or not, it depends on the day. Mr. Big Chungus with the batteries and threw an 11-1 into this gun. I immediately started having problems with it on the first game. The recommended battery for this and a battery it comes with is a 9.6 volt. When I was using the LiPo battery in this gun, I noticed that it had seized several times when I was trying to use it. If you put a LiPo battery in this gun, it seizes up, and it could be like, oh, well, the 11.1's too powerful. So I used this 7.4 volt LiPo that I have, and we had the same results. The gun would seize up, the gears would stop spinning, the trigger would not pull. After the 7.4 volt LiPo wasn't working in this gun, I went back to the 9.6 nickel battery. It hasn't had that issue since. This gun can only perform with a non-LiPo battery. Even on other guns that are non-LiPo, when I use a LiPo, I use the 7.4 volt on this Valken. This is their like starter line ASL. I mean, it looks beefy now, and that's just because I threw on some fancy parts, which I'm probably going to do a whole video on this gun by itself, and the story of it, and the review of this Valken, and just talk about it, because very good eye candy. I always catch myself staring at it for way too long because it looks sick. With the 7.4 volt, this gun would not shoot fast. Battery no go vroom vroom. The trigger response was really slow. You'd have to pull the trigger in, fully release the trigger, and then pull it in again. You couldn't feather it, according to all major airsoft battery experts out there, which I'm not knocking them. I'm not saying that they don't know what they're talking about, because they definitely do.
I recommend the 7.4 volt LiPo battery a lot to a lot of newer players who want a little bit more performance out of their gun. Little nunchuck battery and you're not really feeling it, you know, you're feeling a little underpowered. This is probably one of the easiest upgrades to make.
What?
My real life experience is showing different results. So with the 7.4 volt in this gun, it shoots astronomically slow. But then you put the 9.6 volt in, the trigger response is super snappy, it's super fast, and the RPS is faster. I'm just basing this off of sounds of brrrs over brr brr. This is a non-LiPo gun, and it only performs well with a non-LiPo, because when I put the 11.1 LiPo in, it started seizing up. People say, oh, it could be because of the shimming and the gears, which is true, but another thing that they don't talk about, which Toronto Airsoft, they did a good video on batteries and why you shouldn't use LiPo batteries in a non-LiPo gun. If it doesn't have a MOSFET, you could actually burn out the trigger contacts.
Basically, there's two conditions to be LiPo ready: overall mech box quality as well as trigger contacts. LiPos can cause something called arcing, which will corrode your trigger contacts over time.
Some of the internals just aren't on par with it. If the gun doesn't directly state that it's LiPo ready, just don't use a LiPo. Just go with the recommended battery that's on the description, or refer to the manual, because here's what I've discovered, and this is the whole airsoft battery debacle. Sometimes your website references aren't entirely accurate, and this is where I don't fault WAG for using the 7.4. Stay away from LiPo unless your gun explicitly says in the manual it is LiPo ready. He probably looked at the EVIC website and saw down at the bottom where it says has the battery category that this does 9.6 small type / 7.4 LiPo. But then I was looking at the SR25s on EVIC, because it comes in different configurations, and the one WAG specifically purchased has the 7.4 marking. However, when you go into the other configurations, it does not state that it can take LiPo. It specifically only has the 9.6 volt small butterfly type. And I was like, okay, maybe they're just different build qualities, different trigger contacts. But each one is priced the exact same, and I don't know if that's a typo on EVIC's part. So I was like, okay, maybe they had a one-off typo. I bet if he threw a 9.6 volt in there, it would perform a lot better. So then I went to the original manufacturer website, and the manufacturer says nothing about this having LiPo-capable internals. I spent a myriad of 2 hours trying to find an answer. It's worth noting that high-end guns now come with MOSFETs pre-installed. If you want to use an older / cheaper AEG, and keyword is cheaper, not necessarily just older, AEG with LiPo batteries, you risk burning out the trigger contacts if you do not add a MOSFET. Just using the general consensus of science based on Google AI, which I wouldn't take it at face value, but it probably has some research behind it saying, yes, if your airsoft gun is labeled as non-LiPo, you should not use a LiPo battery with it. Doing so could damage the gun's internal components due to different voltage and power delivery characteristics of LiPo batteries compared to the type designed for the gun. Potential risk of using the wrong battery. Overheating. A LiPo battery used in a non-LiPo gun could potentially overheat the motor or wiring due to excessive power. Where have I heard or seen that before?
Hello, darkness, my old friend.
In this rabbit hole, I started looking at the other guns I have, which are stated to be LiPo ready, and I came back to my Matrix Special Edition AK, and I noticed something very curious on the EVIC website. They offer a package that comes with the 9.6 volt nunchuck style batteries. Why is that a problem, you may ask? How the flippin' flam Am I supposed to fit this in this AK? You're telling me you're listing a package for this gun, which I checked doesn't come in a rear wire configuration. So, moral of the story. It's the only thing I don't like about AK airsoft guns. Too long didn't read. Don't go off of what the website says can come. What the website says the. Don't go off the battery recommendations that the website says. Don't go off battery recommendations from people who have been experienced and say you can just throw a lipo in anything. Go off of what the manual says. Go to the original manufacturing website to see what they recommend the battery is. We're talking purely starting out. Just get the battery that's recommended. Or at your field, most airsoft fields have a tech. Ask your airsoft tech what they recommend using for the gun. From my experience, at the field I play at, when we had an airsoft tech, he always recommended not to use a lipo if your gun isn't lipo ready. For example, on this AK, it specifically states that it is lipo battery ready and tuned to high power performance. Out of the box, straight from the factory, is lipo ready and tuned, and I double confirmed that with the manual. So yeah, that's about it for this video. It's just a little informative thing, and kind of just like seeing Wag so sad about his SR25 shooting really slow just put me in a whole rabbit hole of airsoft batteries once again, because this is the 5th time I've done this research, and I always come back to the same conclusion. This is just to show that the 7.4 volt LiPo is fully charged. This is not the battery that caused the fire in the G&G. This is a brand new 7.4 volt. So let's start with the LiPo gun. This is the LiPo gun. You can see the 7.4s in it, right? Semi. Did you see that delay? You see that? The trigger seizes up. Listen to that. That's your sound, okay. 9.6 volt, non-LiPo. Way more hard hitting, full auto. You hear that fire rate? So to say that these two batteries are the same and they're not gonna differently affect your gun, not so black and white. This is a non-LiPo gun. See, the gears are skipping. Ready? Full auto. Hear how slow that is? Better trigger response? Full auto. If you have a high-end gun with a MOSFET, there might not be a difference between these two batteries. When WAG Entertainment used the 7.4, which is not LiPo ready, I think it's safe to say that the reason WAG's SR25 was shooting so slow was because he was using the 7.4 LiPo. The Airsoft battery dilemma!